How Grandpa Came Into the Money by Else Sontenhave. He was a sweet soul, my grandfather, but when the brains were passed out, he must have been absent. I still marvel how grandmother could raise a family on his earnings. We all lived in one little house, and we were a scrawny lot. Nobody ever had to coax any of us children to eat. In fact, after having had lunch at my mother's, I would go upstairs to grandmother and have another one. And then I would visit Aunt Bertha, who lived a few doors away, and eat some more. What a ripe apple tasted like, I found out only when I was well over 15 and apprenticed to a shopkeeper in the city. Apples did not ripen in our village. They never had a chance. They were so sour, they would have pulled the holes in our stockings together. But no apples ever tasted as good again as those little green ones. One time in my entire childhood, I felt good and full. Aunt Bertha had forgotten to lock the larder, and I disappeared with, and devoured 22 donuts. The rest of the family never forgot nor forgave me. Years later, when I arrive at family gatherings, someone would always shout, "Watch the donuts!" Perhaps you can imagine what it meant when one fine day fortune smiled on grandfather. He got himself in a train wreck. Now, if something like that happened to you, and you survived, you had it made. The railroad would pay. So all of the lucky passengers knew exactly what to do. They commenced to groan piteously and writhe upon the ground while waiting for the doctors and stretcher bearers to arrive. All but grandfather. He had a better appetite than the rest of us combined. Never in his life had he missed a meal, and he was not going to start now. No, sir, not for a puny train wreck. So he cut himself a stout walking stick and set out for home, a 3-hour walk. In the meantime, the news of the wreck had already reached the village, and the telegram had said, "No fatalities." I cannot describe the many looks that passed across my grandmother's face when she saw her husband come striding in the door, covered with dust, a bit tired from his long walk but sound of limb and smiling broadly, for he was just in time for dinner. First came relief at seeing her man unharmed. Then the relief mingled with and finally was replaced by fury. Grandfather had passed up his one and only golden opportunity. So she turned into a kind of tornado. Before he knew what was happening, he found himself, minus his pants, and in bed. His plaintive protest did him no good. Grandma slapped a wet towel on his head while Mother went to search for the only medicine we had in the house. Castor oil. Grandfather cried out in horror and tried to disappear onto the blanket, but Mother clamped his nose shut and dosed him anyway. Poor man. The only thing he really needed was his dinner. But what could he or anyone else do once his wife and daughter had made up their minds? Having accomplished this much, one of the children was dispatched to get a hold of the doctor. He came, gave Grandpa a thorough examination, and was just about to congratulate him on his excellent state of health when my mother went into action. She planted herself firmly in front of the doctor, drew herself up to her full height of 4 feet 10 inches, and told him in no uncertain terms that Grandpa had suffered a severe shock and concussion of whatever brains he had. How else to explain the fact that he walked away from this chance of a lifetime? Did the doctor have another explanation? Ha! The doctor took one look at her grimly determined face. He knew when he was licked. He resigned himself, accepted my mother's diagnosis, and laughed. And then came the time of waiting. The two women did all they could to keep Grandpa in bed and coached him carefully on what to say and what not to say when the railroad people came. Grandpa nodded wisely and promised to cooperate. But did you ever try to keep him ill in bed? He gave them the slip as often as not. And when, in desperation, they hid his pants, he bribed one of us children to find them for him and got out of bed anyway. And out of bed he was when we heard the long-awaited commotion outside of the house. Peeking through the window, we saw the railroad investigators, with the entire village gathered respectfully behind them, waiting to learn the outcome. Pants, boots, and all, Grandpa was stuffed into bed, and the covers were pulled up to his chin. The shades were lowered. The bottle of castor oil was placed prominently by his bedside, and the investigators were ushered in. From the first moment, it was clear that Grandpa had forgotten all of the careful coaching. He beamed welcome at the distinguished visitors and complimenting them on their good looks. He then went on to talk of the weather and then of the crops. When the railroad doctor finally managed to ask him what injuries he had sustained, my mother signaled frantically by pointing to his head. "Well," said Grandfather with an angelic smile, "there's really nothing else wrong with me that 100,000 gulden couldn't cure." My mother promptly fainted. Grandma shrieked and ran from the room, and the claims adjusters doubled up with laughter. After they had recovered and revived poor Mulla, they awarded Grandpa 5,000 gulden, making him the richest man in the village. But to his dying day, he could never understand why they had given him the money.